Hello there. Time to get a little comfortable here. All right. So, what is the topic of conversation today? Well, the general gist of what I would like to talk about today, sort of an idea for people who are not really, maybe they don't feel like they've found that thing that they're supposed to do yet, or they're stressing or they're judging themselves about where they're at compared to where they thought they would be. And they may not have this in place yet. They may not have that in place yet. Whatever the things that they imagine that they should have in their life, maybe it's not there yet. It's kind of an interesting thing. Sometimes cigars will come wrapped with a piece of cedar wood, and you can actually light your cigar with them. Let's see if I can do it. Sorry if you got any noise from me bumping the microphone. I know I was bumping it, but that is one way that you can light a cigar when they come wrapped in the cedar like that. Very well. So, for those of you who you may not be where you thought you would be, or maybe where people told you should be, or sorry, you're just not quite at the place in life that you expected. And well, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk some about what that means, what that could mean, why you might have those feelings, where did those expectations come from, and things like that. So, a lot of people in my generation, the millennial generation, we grew up, we were told there's certain things that you need to do in life. And one of those things is you got to go to school and you got to do this, you got to do that. You got to get an education. Now, for perspective, I grew up in the Bay Area of California, San Francisco Bay Area. And the advice that I was receiving was basically predicated on the idea that I was going to stay there. Maybe not exactly that there was the assumption that I was going to stay there, but I remember, the generic conversations were something like, it's not cheap to live here and you're going to have to do this or that or the other to be here. And there's a lot of opportunity here. So, it's a kind of a good place to be if you get in the mix. Now, the problem was, Briar, come here. The problem was, like I said in the previous video, actually in the first video I uploaded, the problem with that was that I was in the middle of a epistemological crisis where I was basically a subjectivist. So I wasn't really certain that reality was real. I wasn't really clear on my position in reality or my relationship to it. And I couldn't really figure out why any of this stuff mattered. If it's all just this kind of dream or illusion, then I don't know how much I really care about numbers on a chart, in my bank account statement. Why should I care about studying math or history or English if my teacher's not real? Or if there's no meaning to life, if you want to go a slightly less dramatic way. If the teacher is real, but there's no possible meaning, there's no possible transcendental justification for any of it. And so I struggled with that, both with solipsism, but also with meaning. Um, Also with justifying the life that I had. And yes, I taped over the logo because I don't have any sponsorships here. So if any major companies want to sponsor this tiny channel with 20 subscribers, hit me up, Megacorp. We're uploading once or twice a week, baby. All right. Anyway, seriously. So I'm trying to get that mega corporation money. All right, let's go. Okay, so I couldn't figure out how to justify the work that would need to be done to get to this place that I was instructed would be a good place to be, And to be clear, I don't necessarily think that those counsels were inaccurate, or I know they were coming from a good place. People are trying to help you, but the problem with advice is it's like there's so many potential layers that you might have to work through before you get to the point where the advice actually can resonate and be heard. Briar. My cat's going crazy, sorry. This is actually a very nice little drink that I made. I went to 7-Eleven and I got a spiced cranberry drink. Come here, buddy. Come on. You want to hang out? No. The doors are open, so they're curious. I got a spiced cranberry drink, and I remember initially when I grabbed it, my first thought was, hey, Popa, this is probably some carcinogenic sludge that's going to rot my brain and corrode my DNA and harden my arteries. But much to my surprise, I turned it around and saw that it was basically sugar and cranberry juice and spices. And I'm like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. So I used it and I mixed it with Kraken rum, and it's actually really good. So, healthy breakfast over here, along with some anonymous bakery cafe. You want to smell the coffee? You smell the milk? The half and half? Half and half smells so good when you're a kitty, doesn't it, honey? Yes. Pardon me if she bumps the microphone. She loves to get little scratches, and then she does a flop, and it's really cute, and she's a very sweet kitty. Doesn't love cigars, so she'll probably leave at some point, but we'll enjoy our time with her while she's here. So that's the problem with advice, is that you have to, in order for it to be effective, you have to take time to break ground and figure out where the other person is at. Because if you don't meet people where they're at, they're not going to be able to relate to what you're telling them. And this is more true now than it's ever been. Now with the internet, people have the ability to go down these really deep, winding rabbit holes, and they end up in places totally estranged from their parents, and they go to schools where the people who are teaching their children are nothing like the way they were raised, their parents were raised, I mean. And, the common response from parents is like, how did we get here? How did it end up like this? It's like, well, people moved away from the rural countrysides and they moved into major cities. And then we developed technology, which allows people to see ideas and hear ideas that never would have been exposed to them before. And social media and video platforms allow people to consume content from ideas, and the printing press exists now, and on and on and on. The past 400 years have been a tremendous time of cultural exploration, which is hyper accelerated in the past, 30 years or so. And the digital age comes with kind of a more of a Greek dialectic form of thinking, which has, um, a public square of debate and things like that. And it's a fascinating time. Um, we're moving kind of away from the printing press, from the written word, back towards the spoken word. And this is a cultural revolution, which will have a lot of implications. But I think ultimately it will be healthy, but it's going to take some time to make the adjustment. A lot of people are going to get basically left behind because it moves faster than people are used to. Back when things were written and then you'd analyze it and then you'd write a rebuttal, and a lot of people are still trying to live like that, where they're making like argument, counter argument, and then they're expecting the other person to address their counter argument, but the other person's already moved on because they've already uploaded 5 videos since then, and that one got buried, and so on and so forth. So uh, there's a lot of space and time between the culture of, maybe your grandparents or your parents, depending on if you're Gen Z or millennial, and the boomers. Um, and when the boomers look around at everything, they just it's very confusing to them how things have changed so much so fast. Um, but this is one of the issues of our generation, the millennials and the Gen Z. This is sort of our thing to work out, is how do we make this make sense in a time where everything is changing so rapidly? And well, I guess that's part of the logic behind the videos that I'm making, is my meager contributions to that project. Whatever little I might add, we'll see. We'll see if anything. Um, and so, how do you justify life? How do you find meaning in life when you're young and you're confused about what it all means, and how, like, why does it matter? And you've heard compelling arguments, and you've watched movies like Inception and The Matrix, and you sort of got it in your head that, like, maybe this stuff is unjustifiable fundamentally. Um, why should I go work my ass off and do all of these things if I'm not even convinced about the nature of reality itself? Well, the first thing that I would say in response to that is, um, the smarter you are, the more likely this temptation, uh, I would call it an intellectual temptation, becomes. It's very fun to sort of imagine away reality. If you're smart enough to do it, it's very tempting to do it. Um, but the problem is that all that really does is elevate the self to the level of deity. And I'll explain why as I drink my mystery brand coffee. Um, the reason that is what occurs is because when the self is elevated to the level of deity, um, that's the position from which the self can say the contents of reality are not real. I am the ultimate locus of reality itself. I am the center of that which is valid. I determine what is valid, right? And mechanically, it operates that way because the gentleman who brought us the the cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am, um, was actually trying to uh, combat Enlightenment materialism, um, sort of an English scientific Enlightenment materialism that was on the rise. And in order to combat that, he cast all of material reality into doubt by basically employing solipsism. And so he employed the Cartesian skeptic methodology, or another way to say that is the perception problem or solipsism. These are all definitions you could use. You could Google these things and search what they are if you're curious. And therefore, he was able to cast the contents of reality into question. And that's the reason I bring that up, is because that is where I was when I was in elementary school. I was doing that. And so when my parents were telling me, oh, you got to go do this and you got to go do that, and you're going to have to make a certain amount of money to survive and have a family, it's like, first of all, uh, I don't necessarily know that I want a family when I was that age. Most of the public school propaganda surrounding families is that they're too expensive and all these other things. You can't afford it. It's not going to work out for you well. Children are destroyed by their parents' traumas and their parents' issues, and it's this generational cycle. Before I move on from that, I just want to quickly say there is a problem with the field of psychology, in which the field of psychology is biased towards observing um, problems and errors and traumas and causal origins, because it basically, the school of psychology is sort of a blend of materialism, evolution, and mysticism. And it's a soft science because of that. And so what they do is they look at the causal origin. This is sort of the material Darwinistic portion of psychology. They say, what is the origin story of this impulse or this trauma? Where did this come from? Usually with the parents or with some authority figure. Where was your trust violated? At what point in time? So on and so forth. Okay, that may be valid, and I think in a lot of cases it is valid. But there are also other ways in which it is not valid. And the main way that it is not valid is that it denies a human's freedom of will and their ability to overcome. If these trauma points were truly deterministic, then we would still be in caves. We would never have evolved. I can't think of a more traumatic life than early humans surviving an ice age, living in caves, and then building out into society, developing farming. This clearly was an application of freedom of will and intentionality that allowed civilization to grow. While we're on the topic, this is also a very good argument against the fixed pie fallacy, the idea that there's a static amount of money that gets shuffled around and that rich people have stolen it. That's also not true, because if that were true, how did we get more than when we were in the caves? So, fixed pie is a fallacy, and the idea that traumas are deterministic is partially untrue. They are an influence point. They're not deterministic. So, there you go. Okay, so you can overcome these trauma points and these deterministic, quasi-deterministic influences which come to you from your ancestors, and you can live a good life despite whatever upbringing you might have had. But you need to be in the right state of mind for it. You need to be sort of making yourself the center of your, I don't know, I don't want to use a word like power, but capability may be a better word. Um, you need to stop thinking of other things as causing you to be weak. You need to stop giving nature or people power over you. And you need to pull some of that back to yourself and say, even if my circumstance wasn't good, even if it was outright bad, um, let alone not ideal, I can still just go have a life. And until you do that, you won't have one. So you better get to doing it, as they say. And the reality is that the life that your parents or your grandparents or, anybody else recommends for you is always going to be missing information in relationship to you because you're going to be different than all those people in some way. And maybe more importantly, the environment that they grew up in has changed. So, for example, when I was young, there was no such thing as competitive gaming. Not for money anyway. You could go play video games and compete, but you couldn't make any money. And now people are earning millions from winning championships in certain games, and they call it esports because it's just like normal sports. And in fact, the same things that you would need to be good at regular sports are in place for esports. You need to be physically fit, pretty young, healthy, powerful mind. All of these things are helpful in sports. Um, so it's a very physical thing in reality, and those who are somewhat physically unwell tend to struggle in esports, um, just as they would in regular sports, because you need fast twitch muscles to be good at these games, and um, I actually know quite a bit about this because I for a little bit of time was kind of going competitive in League of Legends. I was streaming. These were the very early days back when Hotshot GG was the most viewed streamer in the most viewed streamer period. And this was when he had about 900 viewers, which was by far the most that anyone had ever had at the time. And I would stream and get, somewhere between 20 and 30 concurrent typically, and then sometimes it would spike up to 100, 90 or 100 depending on what I was doing or the relevance of the thing I was doing at the time. And I got ranked 3,500 on the North American ladder, which was top 0.6% of the player base at the time. Game had millions of registered users. It was the biggest game in the world at the time. I wrote video game guides. I actually got millions of views on my video game guides. I think I ended up with about 7 million total views on my guides, and I would load into games and people knew my name. It was kind of a surreal time. It was the first time that I was actually really good at something that I did for my own sake. And that's kind of the reason I've chosen to go into the story here, is because my parents never would have told me to do any of those things or just spend my time that way. But I was doing this in my early 20s, and I was still in my solipsistic prism. I was still in my Cartesian skepticism era. I was still depressed. I still had no meaning in my life. I still didn't know why I was here. And I was playing this game, and the reality of what I was going through and the challenges I was facing and overcoming successfully were undeniable. I felt meaning for the first time. Um, I felt like I was on my path, doing my thing for the first time in League of Legends, and that's why League of Legends will always be something that I talk about and why it's always going to be kind of near and dear to my heart. It was an era of self-actualization and doing things without permission, things that actually my parents didn't really approve of, but doing them for me and doing them in a way that added richness to my life and created community and created networking and the interesting thing was, as I was in the middle of doing all of those things, which goes back to my first video, when you become the pure act, which is you mix your faith with your freedom, and you combine them, and you become this action, which is not questioning itself anymore. You're not rationalizing anymore and thinking about why should I do this? Does this even matter? You just go do it, and then the meaning flows to you freely. I'm gonna take this off because it's getting a little warm. 1 second. I tried not to hit the microphone, but I think I did. My apologies. Um, when you get to this place where you become the pure action, um, where you're not doubting these things and you're simply acting, and you're not rationalizing and asking yourself, does this really matter? You're just doing things for your own benefit. Those kinds of questions go away. You don't ask yourself, is there meaning in this? Should I be doing this? You're simply doing it. And that was my first dose of success. And originally I attributed that to, like maybe I'm just a gamer, maybe I just like games. Eventually, what I realized over 5, 10 years is no, I can tap into that at any time in any subject. The key was self actualization and not hyper rationalizing it. That was the piece. And a lot of parents really are kind of an obstacle to the creative youth, particularly the creative youth or the intellectually minded youth, who may have questions or, very annoying kinds of questions because they're qualitatively difficult to answer. And not all of us, I mean, in fact, I would say probably most of us are not interested in those kinds of very particular questions. I was also the annoying kid who would bother pastors because I would come up with these extremely difficult theological arguments. And then when some poor guy who just loves God and loves his church, he just wants to help people find what he found. I go and ask this pastor, like, if God is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient, meaning he's at all places, he's all powerful, and he's all knowing, and that's across time, and God is the Father and the Son, meaning he was at the beginning and he was at the end, aka the Alpha and the Omega, then he knows which souls and which people are going to be born, will be going to heaven, and who will be going to hell. He's also the giver of life. He created life. And so, if all of these things are true, then how can he be merciful, knowing that he gave us the free will and that it's technically our choice, but still knowing who is going where? How can he be merciful? And I would ask questions like this to a pastor. And you just see the look on the guy's face like, I want to give you an answer, but I can't. And because I was kind of, I would say, you know, I believed that if a question was intelligent or coherent, it should be able to be answered. I did believe that when I was that age. We're talking maybe 16, 17, 18 years old. I was asking pastors these kinds of questions. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't doing this as a trap. I authentically believed that somebody would have the answer to these kinds of questions. And I was struggling with doubt based on these kinds of questions. I'm currently basically an agnostic or a deist. We can talk about that later. But my current supposition is that um, there are certain kinds of questions which don't have answers, but it's not because the questions can't be answered. They could be, but it's because of our limitations as perspective bound creatures in a time bound, existence that we won't be able to access those questions. And also the perception problem that Descartes outlined, I think is valid and causes us to be unable ultimately to validate these kinds of questions. And so what the answer to that is faith. It's very interesting that the actual answer that the church provides, which is that you need to have faith, is the same answer that I've come to epistemologically speaking through philosophical study and exploration. But the faith that I'm describing is relatively secular in nature, which is something that is somewhat mysteriously absent from the philosophical world and I would wager might be one of my most revolutionary philosophical ideals if I was going to give myself the credit of being able to think of something like that, which is that there's actually a necessary place for faith in secular epistemology, and it's curiously absent. And I think that it's curiously absent because the impulse of the questioning mind is that it seeks the answers that it's not going to get. And so instead of being comfortable in that space of not knowing the answer, you have to move forward knowing that the question is actually fundamentally not answerable. Um, and this is the problem that we're having as a culture, and the problem that our young people are having. They're looking for answers to questions that they will never find the answers to. Now that's not a black pill. That's not like a nihilistic claim. It's actually a white pill, because what it does is it empowers you to move forward without the answer and to engage your curiosity and to really get explorative. I don't know. Go explore the world. You'll find amazing wonders and mysteries, and because you're not looking for answers, because you're approaching the world with curiosity, then life really becomes an adventure, and you're able to be free to seek things, and instead of the world looking dead, the world looks kind of mystical and alive again when you embrace the uncertainty that is actually the nature of your reality. You're not certain about anything, even if you think you are. If you think that you're certain or that you have the answers to anything, then you're just misguided, and you're setting yourself up for either a tragedy or at least a disappointment. So, um, the white pill is that nobody has the answer. So when people give you their personal black pills, which come from their personal ideologies, for example, they give you the idea that nothing matters because of solipsism or their personal subjectivism or their inability to articulate the transcendental nature of reality, which allows you to participate in something bigger than you, um, because they're stuck in sort of a personalized prison where they don't really have a space in which to be judged, and all of their personal suppositions are automatically valid because you've given them approval by yourself. That's a meaningless space, and you become the arbiter of what value is, and you become the arbiter of what meaning is, and you actually don't get to be that, because reality is a judge. Reality has standards, reality has transcendentals, and it can show you that you are wrong. So if you're ignoring it, you're just going to be hurt over and over and over again. You're going to be surprised. You're going to be caught off guard. When you switch away from this kind of personalized, self-accepting kind of, I don't know, self-deification, self-reification, whatever you want to call it. When you move away from that space, which is a kind of naive and childish game of illusion and delusion, and you allow reality to correct you, and the mechanism that you use to allow reality to correct you is faith, meaning I'm going to make a model, I'm going to make a prediction, and then I'm going to try it. And then when reality tells me if I'm right or wrong, I'm going to allow it to do that. That is a much more secure, emotionally secure, mature, stable place to be, that will allow you to really, there goes my lighter, that will allow you to really begin to thrive in life. I got this kind of cool brass ashtray. Yeah, you can hear it. Okay. Brass ashtray. I think it's probably supposed to be outside, but I like it here inside. It's kind of nice. Um, and it frees up counter space. So I like that. I just realized you guys can't see the praying statue, but that's a bronze statue I got, which I'm really fond of. I like it a lot. I guess it's a Salvador Dali sculpture or something like that. Of course, this is a replica. Let's make sure that the branding remains covered. No sponsorships, remember. Okay. And then on the other side, you have the certainty which comes from the kind of materialistic epistemological suppositional set. Another way to say that is sort of an empirical rationalist or a Marxist or even a Darwinist to some extent, these kinds of material ideas. And the certainty is the problem here. So on the other side, it's certainty, and on this side, it's also certainty. It's the certainty that's the problem. It's when you start to ignore the signals that come from reality based on the idea that you have of the thing that we're talking about. So you get this kind of nihilism from both ends. The hardline deterministic materialist will tell you that nothing matters because people don't have free will. And therefore, you know, the highest priority is just simply comfort because we're just these kind of programmable robots that go through life. And that, of course, is not true. But if you believe that idea, it feels true. And when you go into public school, you will hear people approach you with these kinds of conclusions on both sides. You'll get some of the subjectivistic sides. You can also think ancient mystic religions. Buddhism is very subjectivistic. Certain strands of Protestant Christian thought are very subjectivistic. And then you have on the other side the more materialistic side. You can think of maybe Calvinists as a good example of what determinism looks like. And possibly Marx or other materialistic philosophers would be a good example of the materialistic side of nihilism. And the reason it's nihilistic is because it ignores the portions of man which can aspire and overcome for themselves and create a life and live your life and be proud and be strong and determine the trajectory of your own life and the direction that you're headed as a man. So you want to be able to counter the nihilism from both sides, and the way that you counter the nihilism from both sides is you reject the certainty in their premises. You identify where they're committing an act of faith in the belief that they have, and then you reject the portions of their worldview which are only made possible by certainty and certain philosophical suppositions. And that frees you to find value in anything that doesn't reject your nature as a human being. And the fundamental nature of human beings consists of a few axiomatic, from a logical perspective, right? Like from a reality-based perspective, there's a lot, but from a logical, axiomatic, rational kind of intellectual perspective, some of the baselines are freedom of will, faith, and judgment. That's kind of the triangle of what it means to be a human from a logical perspective. And if you try to violate any one of those three things, you no longer have a human being. So, for example, if you try to tell me that I don't have free will, and I ask you, why are you trying to tell me that? What's your motivation for trying to tell me you don't have free will? Why would you waste your breath? If I don't have free will and if you don't have free will, what's going on here between us? Why would you try to make an argument to someone who doesn't have free will to accept or deny it? You end up invoking freedom of will in the effort to disprove it. It's very paradoxical. The same is true of judgment. If you say, don't be judgmental, I'll tell you, is that not a judgment of me? Are you judging the fact that I'm judgmental? You can't avoid judgment. You have to judge. Judging is an intrinsic portion of what it means to be a human. And faith is the key. After you've established those two axiomatic suppositions, faith is actually the key which allows you to go interact with the world. Because if you don't have faith, if you don't apply faith, then you will be stuck in a rationalistic cycle, which means that it's all occurring in your mind and it never interfaces with reality and you never receive feedback from reality. So then you're just stuck in the prison of thinking, and you will unfortunately die there if you never learn how to activate faith, if you never learn how to interface with reality. And the way you interface with reality is faith. So that's like the human triangle. That's what it means to be a human, is you have to go through that triangle. And once you have those two base suppositions, freedom of will and judgment, you can go through faith and interface with reality. And that's how you open that door. And then the position of the locus of masculinity is the pure act, which is the elevation of faith and freedom of will to the maximal point. And once you have the pure act, nihilism disappears. It's completely gone. You're just living your life, you're just doing things. There's no nihilism inside of the pure act. And so the reason I've gone through all of that philosophy is because young people are being told to think about what they want to do. And it's the worst possible advice because we have these young people inside of these environments which are full of logical pit traps and epistemological errors. And they think and they think and they think, and they're going to die in those thoughts. They're not going to ever touch their feet on the ground and get moving and start doing things and make that ripple in material reality. They're never going to participate in the causal chain of reality, so to speak. They're never going to start influencing others. They're never going to start making a difference. They're not going to find a wife and they're not going to have a family. And they're going to play video games by themselves and they're going to stay in that space for as long as they're able to do it. Because until they can justify the point of reality, there's very little argument against gaming alone in a room. Why would you bother taking on all the risk of going out into the world and trying to find a wife when more than half of marriages end in divorce and male depression has never been higher, and it's so hard for young people to justify why they should go out into this world and participate in all of this risk. Why should they take on the responsibility of being a good man in society? Why not just game and watch, YouTube and whatever other video websites they entertain themselves with when they're alone, and watch anime and read mangas and do all of the stuff that totally fully distracts them from the fact that they have no meaning in their life and there's no purpose to it. Um, Young men aren't stupid. They're not going to take on that risk unless they have a transcendental meaning which justifies it. And we have a very rapidly secularizing society. They're not finding this meaning in religion anymore. And as soon as you use a religious argument, you've lost them. And I am not religious in any particular sense. I'm theologically interested, and I understand that I can't disprove gods. I think that the likelihood of God and the likelihood of the absence of God are basically equally unfalsifiable suppositions. Therefore, from a logical perspective, equally likely. But my bias um, is that when I look around, I think it's more likely, to some extent, and I know that I can't justify this intellectually, but it's my experience that it seems more likely that there is a creator who's interested in us. So I'm more like a deist. And that's something that has been a gradual evolution over years, maybe 10 years. I moved from it's more likely that there's not a God, although I acknowledge the potential that there could be, gradually across 10 years to now thinking that it's slightly more likely that there is a God. Um, and I understand that this is not a position I could justify, but going back to like what I think is provable, I think it's equally 50-50 likely there could be a God, there couldn't be a God. But no one is actually going to know either way. It's impossible to falsify. Um, and so I don't spend a lot of time on the question. I don't think it's particularly useful. I don't think that most people today really believe in any meaningful sense. They might express a privately held view, but um, fundamentally, I try to make all of my arguments secular because I think that's where most people are, and so I want to meet people where they are. Sorry if that caused a lot of noise. I want to meet people where they are, and I want to talk about these things from a secular perspective because I think that's where most people are. And so I think that the idea of secular faith is necessary to live. I think that faith is basically an axiomatic necessity. I don't really think you can live your life without faith. Um, and I don't mean that in a religious way. It has nothing to do with my belief that there's a probability of a God. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. It's purely a mechanical interface with reality, which stems from the Cartesian perception problem that I think that faith is necessary. But we'll move on. So your parents tell you to get a job, and you have no way to justify why, because you don't necessarily believe that you want a family like they did. You don't necessarily care about living in Silicon Valley. You don't necessarily care about living in New York, right? Like, why would I pay all this money to be in this place? I was born in this place. I have no loyalty to it. I have no fealty to the San Francisco tech billionaires. I don't care about their life or their prosperity. And a lot of young people, I would say the vast super majority actually of young people, they don't give a shit about the national GDP. They don't care at all about whether or not the country's making money. Um, it really doesn't have any material effect on their life. You know, we're talking about people who are unable to buy a house. They're competing with um, both American-born citizens and immigrants, and the immigrants are both illegal and legal, and here on visas like H-1B and all these different things. They're here from all kinds of different places and different walks of life. And Americans are feeling the squeeze of the financial world becoming something of a dream that they don't feel like they can access, or perhaps if they could access it, it would require 80 to 100 hours of work a week, either on study or on the actual job site. And Americans are not in a position um, philosophically. They're not in a position either theologically, philosophically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever word you want to use. They're not bought into life enough to do that. And this is the problem. This is the generational divide. Because, you know, you have your boomers, or probably even Gen X to some extent, although I think in Gen X we start to see some of this shift happening. In millennials it's very present, and in Gen Z um it's at least the norm. It's the majority. You see, the normative position of Gen Z is, fuck it, I don't care anymore. A huge portion of millennials are right there with them. And there's a significant amount of Gen X who feel the same way. And boomers don't get it. Um, Boomers are like, why? What happened? And it's like, well, when you take a look at the consequences of deliberate inflation, deliberate annual inflation. Um, the price of housing goes up all the time. Businesses can't really account for that. So it's not the business's fault that the government is intentionally inflating the currency. When you have money, right? So let's use a very, very rudimentary example. This is overly simplistic, but we'll just have to go with it. Let's say you have $2 in existence, and you have one of the dollars, and I have the other, right? That means you have 50% of the money, and I have 50% of the money. And then the government prints two new dollars. Okay. They have 50% of the money now. You have 25% of the money, and I have 25% of the money. Now, that's obviously a very simplistic and extreme example of how this works, but that's what inflation is. It is when the money supply becomes less valuable because the dollars that exist represent a percentage of the economic pie, and the pie can grow and shrink on its own. And that's where this gets more complicated. Because if the American economy doubles in power, in theory, your dollar becomes more valuable because it's a representation of that pie. But printing always devalues the value of money. It always shrinks the percentage of the pie that you have possession of. Okay. So the question is printing, could you make printing worth it? Now we're getting into sort of Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics, and we're not going to go there. But the idea behind the Keynesian model is that a little bit of inflation is beneficial because it drives innovation and progress. And if you can grow the economy by doing that, then you can justify basically stealing people's money from them. And then the Austrian side says, no, it's not justifiable. There should be ebbs and flows and ups and downs, and people should be able to plan and blah, blah, blah. Basically a gold standard kind of way of thinking. I'm not going to get into which one is right or wrong. I don't think that it's appropriate, and I think that both have their pros and cons. It's not really related to this particular video, although I will say that I think that what we've been doing in this country is very demoralizing to the American people because we're printing money and then sending it overseas, and people really cannot handle that because they feel the pressure of what life is like here right now. And if we're going to print money, we shouldn't be sending it overseas because it's basically like taking your dollars and shipping them away. And that just is devastating to the psyche of the average American who's struggling with gas prices and the cost of eggs. And it's really not the place of businesses to have to foot the bill for that. Well, without getting political, that's probably why we changed party loyalty a lot in the last election cycle, is because of that kind of Keynesian model of economics. And it made people kind of get into this mutinous spirit where they wanted change. And I'm not advocating for either side, but I'm just saying that that's probably what happened. And when you look at the way that the party voting changed, Gen Z males, more than half of them voted for the right in the last election cycle. And they are the group who I'm focusing on this video a lot because they're sort of the future. And I have a feeling they're struggling with the crisis of meaning. And this was kind of a way that they could say they didn't like the current situation and try to invoke some change. And to some extent, it is an expression of pure act, which I do advocate for. Because they're saying, well, if I don't like the circumstances, if I don't like the direction, I'm going to try to change it. And, you know, I think that it's pretty likely that they're going to be disappointed with the outcome of it. Because if what they're struggling with is a crisis of meaning and they're looking at the situation, and by the way, I'm not saying that they made the wrong choice in doing what they did. I'm just saying that from an analytical perspective, I think it's pretty unlikely that a bunch of um, real estate and tech billionaires are really going to actually play nationalistic protectionist politics. The interests don't appear to be aligned, so I think it's pretty unlikely they're actually going to do it. But that's a little bit of a different conversation, but it is all related to the conversation that I started talking about in the beginning anyway, because it goes back to the original question, which was, um, how big of a jump or a leap or how large of an execution are we expecting our young people to make? How much should they pay for rent? How many dollars should they need to make to live? Um, I myself decided to leave California. The cost of living there is too high. Rent is too expensive. Land is too expensive. Because land is so expensive, it even makes the price of goods high. Um, your local grocery store has to pay elevated real estate prices, and therefore they have to charge a lot more for goods. Um, and they can charge more for goods because there's so many people living there who need to buy those things. And so you have basically the same confluence of variables, which is going to make living there very expensive. And it's largely driven by real estate prices in those major cities. Um, so I just didn't feel like the juice was worth the squeeze. And I left and I went through an exploratory period where I lived in Costa Rica, I've lived in Idaho, I've lived in North Carolina briefly. Um, I've traveled some, I've seen Italy, I've seen Hawaii, I've driven through a lot of states. I've seen a lot of the world. I visited Nicaragua, I visited Colombia. I've seen a lot of different places, and I've seen wildly different styles of living. And for me, I like a little bit of a balance. I like enough of a challenge that I get up and go. Um, and I like enough of the local growth that I can see my engagement actually prospering. Um, in a place like California, it's a little bit hard to see growth and it's a little bit hard to see how you're going to actually get into that pie. It's almost like you have to go there with money or something, or you have to work 80 to 100 hours a week to be able to afford to live there, and I just don't want to do that. I've never wanted to do that. I like working my 40 to 50 hours a week. Sometimes 35 maybe, sometimes even 32, but 32 to 50 hours a week is nice. And I like to be able to go home and do things and go to cigar lounges and talk at a camera or whatever. Or I used to play video games, whatever the thing I want to do, I want to have some time for it. And you'll talk to boomers and you'll hear from them, we have to be competitive with this place and we have to be competitive with that place. And those people over there are working 8 hours a week. And I just don't think that Gen Z cares. They don't care. It's like, okay, if that's what it takes to be a world power, I don't want to be one. Um, and the problem that boomers are having right now in terms of reaching this uh, demographic of youths is that they're not making any effort to meet Gen Z where they are. They're talking about, basically GDP and like charts and graphs and like data sets and like, you know, even I've done a little bit of that in this video, over half of this and all these kinds of things. And um, Gen Z is a very it's a lot more humanistic than previous generations. Previous generations were a lot more economic in the way they thought. Gen Z is very interested in experiences and doing things and living style. It's like a more European way of thinking than previous generations, which were a lot more American, which is like economy focused, making money, getting your bank account right, materialism, buying things. And Gen Z is more um, experience minded and humanistic in the way they see the world. And I'm not making the case that either one is right or wrong. I don't actually think that way. Um, as I'm aging, I'm leaning a little bit more towards experiences rather than possessions. So I kind of sympathize with Gen Z a little bit. Um, and at some point, it's like, well, what price are we willing to pay as people to be world leaders? The reason I moved away from big cities is because I didn't enjoy spending all of my time competing over a finite pool of resources. That's why I don't recommend for young people to go move into big cities, or if they're already in them, I encourage them to move away. You can move to a lot smaller of a city, and it's not that hard to afford a house 20, 30 minutes outside of a medium-ish size city. You can move 20, 30 minutes outside of Raleigh. And if you're coming from the California perspective, it's going to feel very affordable. Um, I'm sure people who were born and raised in Raleigh think that the price is insane now, but uh, any one of those kind of mid-sized cities in the country will provide an economic relief and a sense of being able to get your time back to a young person. And there's still going to be a city that's sort of big enough that you could work inside of it. As long as you do your research about the kind of work you want to do and what kind of life you'd be willing to live, you should be able to plan a 40-hour work week and live near a mid-sized city. And you should be able to get some solitude and you should be able to get some free time back. You can basically live any life you want in this country. It's pretty accessible. You just have to. Now I'm going to sound like the boomers at the beginning of the video. You just have to figure out what you want. But the way that I'm going to encourage you to figure out what you want is basically the opposite of what the boomers would have encouraged you to do. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is to stop thinking and just start trying things. You basically have to become a wild man and throw yourself into things. If there's some course you've been dreaming about, just sign up and start taking classes in the evenings. Just embrace a temporary workload that will be kind of annoying at first. But as long as you have a trajectory towards the lifestyle that you want, you now have a goal, and you can do what they call SMART goals. And you can do specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. And you can break it up, and you can measure your progress, and you can start getting those dopaminergic hits, that good dopamine, right? People are just a collection of chemicals. And you can start to have the satisfaction and the joy of moving yourself towards these outcomes, which will benefit you in very material, but also kind of spiritual ways. And I highly recommend that you do that. Just dive in, take on more than you can handle on purpose. I'm going to explain to you why that actually works and why it doesn't destroy you like you probably think it will. And the reason that it's not going to destroy you is because, first of all, we survived an ice age. Okay, like we are very durable, hard, physically strong. Like a black widow can bite you and you're not going to die, most likely. A rattlesnake can bite you, you're probably good. You can lose an arm. Like we are very durable creatures. And we are amazingly mentally tough. And like part of the reason we were able to escape the plains and the caves and conquer the world is because, like, you just can't stop humans. Like, we are unbelievably durable and tough. So embrace that part of yourself that is powerful and durable and unstoppable. Embrace that part of yourself. And take on a workload that you don't think you can handle, and you'll find out that you can. It might be overwhelming at first, but you'll find out you can handle it. Um, and then the reason that it works is because of a thing called time preference. Some people have low time preference, and some people have high time preference. And when you have a high time preference, you need your rewards now. You need to be able to feel your rewards now. But the problem is that high time preference is very feast or famine, and it doesn't prepare for the future, and it's a very bad long term strategy. So they did a study where they had kids. They put a marshmallow on a plate, and they told the kids, if you don't eat this marshmallow within the next 30 minutes or whatever it was, we'll give you 2 extra marshmallows, so you have a total of three. Or like the specific quantities, I don't remember, but the premise was like, if you just wait, you'll get 3 marshmallows. And something like 70% of the kids ate the marshmallow because they couldn't exercise a low time preference so that they could get a bigger reward at the end. Unfortunately, our culture has been shifting towards a higher and higher time preference, meaning we need our rewards immediately, or else we don't think that the thing is worth doing. We get very impatient and we get very frustrated. This is a very immature and toddler like mentality. It makes you childish if you have a high time preference. It makes you weak and it makes you vulnerable. You can't prepare for the winter. And the problem with not being able to prepare for winter is that winter is always coming. It's always coming. There's always going to be a hard time in your life. And the more grain and supplies and timber you're able to stockpile for the proverbial winter, the metaphorical winter, the better off you're going to be. And part of surviving winter is having the skills to do it. So that's the reason why I'm encouraging you to just do things, just take the class, just load up on the course while your life is okay and you're surviving right now. Because when the winter comes, you're going to want to be in a different position than you are now. If you're living paycheck to paycheck in a big city, you need to, while you're still above water, you need to figure out how to solve that problem. If that means moving, if that means like whatever it is that you have to do, you really have to do it because your circumstance will change. You may not always have your health. Like there's any number of things that could change. Rent could go up. Who knows? Taxes could go up. Like all of these variables, inflation, all of these variables could change your circumstances. So you really need to learn how to save that extra money, how to shift your skill set so that you can have a job that pays more. Whatever the case may be, you gotta move. And I'm not talking about planning per se. I'm talking about literally just doing things. Because when you get into that planning mentality and the thinking place, that's where your logical mind is going to take over and you're going to get the crippling anxiety and it's just not going to work. So just go do it. Stop thinking about it. Just go do these things. And you may not know why, or you may not feel like it's worth it. You might be thinking, I don't feel motivated to do that this week. I'll start next week. You're not going to start next week because motivation is the unnecessary step between you and action. You don't need to be motivated. You just need to go do it. And some people call it discipline, but I just call it apathy. You're not doing it, so it's not happening. It's that simple. It's like, oh, I need to be disciplined. I need to have a routine. I need to make a schedule. I need to do all. Those may be useful tools. But if you literally just get up and do something, you don't even need to be disciplined. It's like, just do it. Just do it, right? Like the Nike slogan. Although I'm not sponsored by Nike, so it's not like the Nike slogan. I'm saying just do it in a completely unrelated context and it's hyper coincidental. No affiliation unless Nike wants to sponsor this channel with 20 subs. We don't give nothing out for free here, baby. We're trying to be dumb rich off this little account with no followers. Maybe one day. Maybe one day I'll be able to peddle nootropic supplements and body cleansing smoothies for your gut biome. Let's go, baby. Okay. So anyway, so you really need to be able to start acting and start doing things that will begin moving you towards a future in which you will be less vulnerable, because scarcity is one of those things that um, you may have an incredible level of mental control. You may be a stoic-minded person on the level of Marcus Aurelius. If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. That's a Marcus Aurelius quote. He was a Roman emperor at the time where 50% of his population died to a plague. And that was his quote: if it's endurable, endure it. Stop complaining. And he's considered one of the great emperors in history, just so you know. You need to be able to put yourself, when there's plenty, when there's bounty, even if you don't feel like you're enjoying the benefits of it, when times are okay, you need to be moving towards um, a lower degree of vulnerability towards scarcity. That is your imperative as a man, as someone who's going to care for themselves. And by doing that, you will find some sense of meaning and some sense of pride and self-respect. And other people will respect you too, because once they see, oh, this is a self-sufficient man who doesn't need anyone to take care of him and who can provide for himself. And that is the first step as a man to being respected by your community, to be autonomous and individual enough that you don't need to be cared for. Fundamentally, and I'm sorry to say it for you guys who are struggling with meaning right now and you're feeling a little down, fundamentally, the dimension of respectability for men is self-sufficiency and independence. If you're not self-sufficient and you're not independent, you will not be respected. There's no two ways about it. Nobody will respect you unless you're independent and self-sufficient. But as a man, when you are respected, there's such a deep sense of fulfillment, and it is truly a wonderful place to be when people don't need to worry about you and you have your ducks in a row. That's basically um, the role of a good man in a society, is to be independent and self-sufficient. And as long as you're there and you're not causing trouble, you are fundamentally a good man. And you'll probably be able to find a partner who will respect you too if you're in that place. Um, Somebody would consider you a viable mate for having children if you wanted to. It's probably the case. But again, we haven't really covered the problem, and I do think that part of the generational gap that we're having right now, and part of the reason that previous generations are not connecting to Gen Z, is that thing I described earlier, which is that previous generations see everything as like a plot of data and charts and graphs, and you know people really are not a set of data. You are not a data set. You're not a chart. You are not your bank account. You are not your financial history. You are not your credit score. You are not the GDP of the United States. And I think that it's a very dehumanizing way to talk about a country of people who are going through struggles which are fundamentally philosophical, theological, spiritual, emotional, all of those kinds of things in nature. I think that's a very dehumanizing way to talk about us, to talk about, oh, this percentage and that percentage, and these people do this and those people do that, and blah, blah, blah. And these guys don't have a home and these guys do. It's like, well, that's fine and all, but I don't think that this linguistic pattern is connecting to the younger people who see themselves as basically radical individuals, which we could do a whole video on that. But you are not a data set. You are not a graph. You're a human being. Fundamentally, you're an American if you were born in the United States, or if you are an immigrant who has nationalized and taken on citizenship in the United States, you're an American. And our destinies are intertwined as American people. What I sympathize with the previous generations is that we have to have some sense of progression or growth as a people. But I don't think that the economy is the only way to envision that. And I don't think that every solution that benefits the economy is the best solution for the American people. I don't think that in every case. To some degree, whether people like their life, it really matters. I know that this sounds like obscene, like just crazy that you have to even say that. Yeah, it turns out whether or not Americans enjoy living on the planet inside of the country of America actually matters. Shocker, crazy. Yeah, it turns out like if you can't find a sense of meaning, if you don't understand the point of reality, if you don't understand the point of life, that matters. And your people won't engage in your silly chart with the green line. And because they won't engage, then the chart will go towards the red line. And then we go, oh no, what's happening with young people? Why aren't they getting married and having children in this world that they find hostile to them? And they can't figure out what the point of life is. It's like, gee, I don't know what's happening with them. Like, why aren't they participating in this world that they think is hostile to them and hates them and wants to just view them as cattle and suck every ounce of their energy out so that others people can see the green line go up? It's like, that's what they think, right? That's how Gen Z feels. Like, if the point of the green line is to make America better, and an entire generation of people don't agree or don't feel that, something is wrong. We either need to explain how this works better, um, or change course. If Gen Z is right, and the corporate greed is the primary factor, the primary variable, and the government is fundamentally untrustworthy, then we have to change course. If the boomers are right, that the economy matters and that the government is for the people, then we have to do a better job at making that reality resonate. But I think that, as with most good arguments, I don't necessarily think that either side is 100% right. I think that there is some reality to both suppositions. I do think that the kind of libertarian fantasy that, like, LOL, we live in a society, this kind of idea that we're all these radical individuals and that the actions of others don't affect us, is kind of self-evidently not true. Um, I think that it's pretty obvious that the actions of others and the quality of life that everyone has does affect us. Look at any major city, and the deeper the struggles of the people there, the worse the quality of life is for the people who live in their penthouse suites on top of a 50th floor of some major high-rise apartment building. Um, we don't live in these radically isolated individualistic pockets where the actions of one don't affect another. Even in the case of victimless actions, if my neighbor is unfulfilled and miserable, it's going to affect me. I want to be in a place where people are living lives so full of meaning that the purpose and joy of life is abundant to them. That would make my life better if my neighbor walks out happy, singing a song, and smiles at me and says, "Hey, neighbor, that's great. That's what I'm looking for." Um, on the same token, I don't know. I also don't believe in Rousseau's social contract, where just by being born in a place, you have intrinsically signed an agreement to certain um, suppositional kind of epistemological um, conclusions, and the fact that you haven't left is evidence that you agree. I mean, I'm not sure that I believe in that either. Um, I think that the founding fathers did a fairly decent job at articulating a lot of these problems, and they did the best that they can, um, creating a structure of government which would avoid some of these pitfalls. But the reality is, if people want to misbehave, they will. And there is no document that can be created that will replace the ethics of man. All governments are corruptible. All government forms are corruptible. Empire, monarchy, republic, democracy, oligarchy, chieftain, tribe, everything is corruptible. If the people have a skewed sense of ethics and meaning and purpose, they will be able to corrupt the form of government. And our government is no exception. We are not immune to that. If our people become immoral enough, then our government will reflect that. And the task of um, millennials and Gen Z is to get really clear on what the role of ethics is in the nation, really clear on what the responsibilities are to one another. But more importantly than even the sort of intellectual portion of this is just to live a good life, actively live a good life, and do your best and try to make the world a better place actively. I've used the metaphor before. You can imagine that you're in a little rowboat on a lake and you have a bucket full of stones, and there's other boats on the lake, and you can throw the stone into the lake and the ripple will go out and it will touch the other boats. Well, let's assume that you have a bucket of nice rocks that do moral things and a bucket of bad rocks that do immoral things. Which bucket are you going to throw from? How are you going to affect all the other boats on the lake? And then even when you're gone, even when you leave the lake, the ripples continue to bounce off the shore and affect other boats on the lake. And gosh, wouldn't it be a better place if everyone is trying, at least trying to throw the good rocks? You know, to some extent, we're all a little bit blindfolded and we have to guess which bucket we're pulling from. But at least try to throw the good rocks. Because everything you do and everything you don't do, for that matter, will affect everyone around you. Um, just like if Panera or any other company, I'm not saying that this is from Panera, but any company who sells coffee doesn't decide to sponsor my videos, that would be possibly a bad rock. It might be a good rock if they decided to sponsor my videos. So just putting it out there. Not that that is from Panera. Could be from anywhere. Or 7-Eleven. I gave an endorsement to your spiced cranberry cocktail. Please give me money. I'm just kidding. The point of this channel, the reason I started making these videos, it has nothing to do with making money. I'm not opposed to making money. If this channel ever takes off and I make money, that'd be a wonderful blessing. The purpose of this channel is that I see a crisis of meaning, especially in our young men, and I'm trying to speak to a group of people who I care about and who I want to see succeed. And if you never hear it from anyone else, just hear it from me. You are not a data set. You are not a graph. You're not a cog in a machine. You're a human being. And the fact that you're still here is a testament to your resilience. If you're struggling to find meaning, if you're struggling to figure out what the point is, keep this in the back of your mind. You're still here. You're still here. The existential dread has not been sufficient to take you out. And the fact that you are surviving and continuing to live speaks to a spark inside of you. There is a potential for a raging flame to emerge, and you can use that flame to burn away. I'm using kind of a Petersonian linguistic pattern here, but I think this metaphor is really true. Um, you can burn away the dead wood from you, the parts of you that aren't working, the parts of you that are holding you back and causing you to be ineffective. And the way that you're going to do this is not by finding the answer. You're not going to find the answer. The way that you're going to do this is by action, by going and living your life and engaging in the world, by making a ripple in reality. Um, by increasing your footprint in material reality, by making your presence felt, by the actions, not the words, by the actions which are unignorable. Like I said, the first place that I did that was actually in a video game. And I remember when I told people that I had these guides which had millions of views, I remember the look on my parents' face as they realized, like, millions of views. That's a lot of views. Like, that's way more than I ever expected my kid to get on something that he wrote. Well, it turns out I have a pretty good writing style and I'm not afraid to be controversial, so I got a lot of views. For those of you who have played League of Legends, this was in season 1. I operated under the moniker Duff Time, the gamer tag Duff Time, and I wrote guides about a new metagame that would counter the model that basically America was using at the time. This was early season 1. And the reason my guides took off is because a player on CLG by the name of Saint Vicious, the gamer tag Saint Vicious, actually used my guide. Now, I can't prove that he read it, but he used it item for item, literally to the T, verbatim, the exact strategy that I recommended in the guide. And I showed pretty complicated math that would prove why it would work. At the time, people were running something called an AP carry, ability power carry, which is a damage dealer who doesn't have a lot of health. They're running that in the top lane. There's 3 lanes, and you would run to the enemy base over the course of about 30 minutes to an hour, and you destroy it. And you're trying to get more gold, and you're trying to get stronger, and you're trying to deny your opponent the ability to do that. And they would run an attack damage carry in the middle, which was also a damage dealing, kind of squishy damage dealing carry. And then they would run a tank and a support bot lane and a kind of a bruiser in the jungle. I'm sorry for those of you who don't know this game. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time explaining this. It's not super the point of the video. But my guide recommended a total switch up, which is basically an off tank or attack damage tank in the top lane, the ability power character in the middle, the attack damage carry and the support bot lane, and a bruiser in the jungle, because that was the only thing you could run in the jungle at the time. And then showed the math of how the kind of off tank would destroy the ability power character top lane, because the ability power was a burst kind of character, and the off tanks had a sustained damage, but they had enough HP to survive the burst. And how an ability power character in the mid lane could one-shot the AD carry, and how the attack damage character was actually the one who needed to be babysat and cared for by the support, and a bruiser can handle himself in the jungle. And it's crazy to think, but at that time, North America was not playing this style until CLG used this guide in their tournament, and they steamrolled everyone all the way up to Fnatic, which had a very interesting kind of double AP style, which had never been seen before. It was pretty competitive, but Fnatic ended up winning that tournament. But the meta was permanently changed in North America. To this day, for the most part, this kind of model is still used in North America. It's been like 13, 14, 15 years. I don't even know how long it's been. I guess 14 years, because I think I wrote that guide in 2011 or maybe even 2010. But it was a permanent shift in the way the game was played based on a guide that I wrote when I was supposed to be working at some job that I didn't like. And that defies all of the logic of what a person ought to do if you were asking anyone. But it began a spiral of self-confidence and belief in myself that transcended all circumstances and pertains to the trajectory of my life and remains with me to this day, influencing me. And that seed of confidence that I gained from doing something that was just for me, and influencing something that was bigger than me across the long term, I still have the confidence from doing that. It will never leave me. Now I go into anything going, I may not do this exactly the way people expect me to do it, but I'm going to do this thing that I set out to do. And if the outcome isn't what I like, I'll pivot. But I believe in myself. I believe in myself so fully. And it's a position of faith. I have faith in myself, regardless of the circumstances. I know that I'm confident and capable. And I trust myself to see myself through any situation. It's part of why I was able to pick up and move and build a life for myself and make it happen across multiple job changes, but still. And now I have a job. I'm not going to tell you where I work, but now I have a job that I like pretty much more than any job I've ever done. I love my coworkers. It's a wonderful place to work. In a new place where I like living better and the living cost is better. Everything is better. And I, to use a word that young people love, I manifested all of that. I didn't just speak it into existence. I took action. I jumped into that space, which is pure act, the relationship between the elevation of faith and the elevation of freedom of will and the maximal possible overlap. I just did it. And I've gone through more changes and more experiences in the past 5 years than probably I ever did in the previous life that I lived, all of it combined. And I never stopped moving, and I never stopped thinking, and I never stopped trying, and I never stopped living and acting. And I'm not saying you can't think. I do think a lot. I study, obviously. I have a shitload of books here on the wall. I draw inspiration from philosophers, but the thought to action pipeline needs to be pretty good. You gotta be able to act on it, right? So it's the action that counts. There's no difference really between a genius who never acts on any of his ideas and someone who doesn't have any ideas at all. The functional distinction is there is no distinction in reality. So unless you're making those ripples in the real world and affecting the real world and changing the real world in a permanent way, because all of your actions have a somewhat temporary but also somewhat permanent nature. Um, you can look at some great leaders in history, like great and terrible. Let's use some great and terrible examples, like Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan. They permanently restructured the political, economical realities of everyone on Earth to this day. And Genghis Khan has millions of living descendants. I mean, there have been some tremendous men in history who have done some unbelievable things. And I would encourage you to try to be a moral actor who does good, incredible things. Um, those two particular men are ethically dubious, but nonetheless, they're good examples of how your actions have permanent consequences, even though they're temporary, and even though you are temporary. So I'm just basically making this video to say you need to become the pure act because that's going to be how you find the meaning and the purpose in your life. It's going to begin the adventure and the sequence of things which unfold that you are now responsible for. And you need to do it on your terms, otherwise, it's not your journey and you're not going to relate to it. People use that as a self defense mechanism. They'll say, well, I never really wanted to do this career, so the fact that I don't like it isn't my fault. And to that, I would say, well, that just means you're a coward, unfortunately. If the journey that you choose isn't your journey and then you say, ah, well, didn't work out. Should have done my journey. It's like, well, you really should have done your journey then. Because if you don't like something and you're on your journey, you get to change it. You have all of the locus of control in your hands. Um, that's why I don't encourage people not to make mistakes. Go ahead and make mistakes. Why not? It's your life. Make your mistakes. Have the kid with the girl that you barely know. I don't care. Just go live your life. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying that if you feel inspired to fall in love and procreate, then the consequences of that are yours, and you're going to be able to navigate those situations and overcome them. If you go get a job and you don't like it, you could just change fields. Like, it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. What will be the end of your world is if you stop living in fear of making mistakes. You're never going to feel fulfilled if you do that. You're never going to reach your potential if you do that. So don't be too conservative. Don't be too cautious. Don't fall into the trap of, oh, I'm not going to make the big leap because I don't know if I can handle the outcome. You can. You will be able to handle the outcome. You'll be okay. Most of the things that people regret in life are not taking the chance. Like the cat took the chance to come and hang out in my lap right now, even though I'm smoking a cigar, and she's not going to be happy about that. And she's not going to regret having done that, even though she just left. She just adjusted her circumstance. Thank you, Kitty, for the help on the video. That was very nice. So, in summary, you are not a data set. You're not a green line. You are not the GDP of the nation. Those things don't have to matter to you. What does matter, though, is that you need to go get engaged in your life. And there's nothing wrong with becoming fabulously wealthy. Becoming wealthy doesn't hurt anyone else, contrary to a narrative that young people believe in. Being fabulously wealthy doesn't hurt anyone. The fixed pie is not real. So if one of your goals is to become fabulously wealthy, you don't need to feel guilt about that. And you can be a very highly ethical actor when you have your money. You can help people. You can do whatever you want. But there's nothing wrong with becoming formidable, becoming wealthy, building a life for yourself, engaging on things on your terms, doing things for yourself. That's all fine. And the good news is, even if someone says it's not fine, they can't stop you. Um, they can vote. They can vote in policies which make it more difficult, but they actually can't stop you if you decide to do that. So, yet, can't stop you yet. So, the point of the video is, don't allow the errors of others to cause you to become nihilistic and depressed and to stop living. Just go live your life. Don't allow the fact that other people are confused and can't figure out what the point of life is to prevent you from finding it. Your life can be as good and as interesting and as exciting and magical as you want it to be. And really no one can stop you. Other than you. You could stop you. So just take the risk, do the thing, make the mistake, learn from it, recover from it, adjust, and get used to applying energy to life. And if you can help it, plan ahead a little bit so that your tomorrow will be better than your today. And be good to people. If you can manage all of those things at the same time, you're going to become more respected. You're going to become more unstoppable. And this is the paradox of what young men believe now, which is that people won't like you if you step on their toes. It's like, well, you don't have to try to step on their toes. Just do your thing and don't apologize if people don't like it. You can apologize if you don't like the outcome. That's a major distinction. Don't feel pressured. Just live your life the way you want to live it. Do your thing. Make your life wonderful and beautiful and interesting and exciting. And make your tomorrow better. And then once your tomorrow is better, you can start to inspire others and you can start to help others to do the same thing. And then you'll have the best of both worlds. You'll start to have community. at least a local community, but possibly even a broader network. Um, and you'll have self-respect, and you'll have the respect of a local community that actually knows you. But as long as you respect yourself, that's the main thing. As long as you feel peace with the choices that you've made and the adjustments that you've made to those plans, that's the main thing. Because you're not a data set. If you're still here, if you're still alive, there's always the chance that your life can become an amazing adventure, even if you're 50 years old, even if you're 80 years old. You can live the last of your life as the most exciting adventure you can muster. And that's what I would encourage you to do, is to build the life you want on the terms that you find agreeable. And once you do that, you're going to find things get really interesting. And then the changes in your life, you're actually accountable for them. So you're actually going to care, right? Because now this is your journey. Now it's not someone else's journey that they made up for you. Now it's your journey. Now you're on the hook for the outcome. And that's actually where you want to be, even though it's less comfortable. That's actually where you want to be. And that's what's going to activate that part of you that can ascend to be something higher than what you are. And if you manage to do that in a way that benefits your community and benefits yourself at the same time, you will have a good life. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter where you end up. It doesn't matter if you ever really make any money at all. You're going to have a good life if you do that. So, you're not a data set. You're not a graph. Your bank account doesn't matter. Your credit score doesn't matter. As long as you're still here living on the planet, you can always just start your adventure at any time for any reason. And my proposition is that whether you can justify the adventure or not, it doesn't matter. Just do it. And what you're going to find is on the adventure, the question of whether or not it matters goes away. And you're going to be more focused on living the adventure and doing the things and having the life. And those questions of does it matter, they're just going to disappear. But you are not a data set. You are not a graph. You're not a green line. If the line goes red for a while, it doesn't matter because you're a human being. You're still in the game. We've survived everything in history. We've become the apex predators of the planet, and we came from caves and tundra, hunted by animals. They say that saber-toothed tigers are genetically adapted to hunt humans. I don't know if that's true or not, but damn, that's a scary idea if it is. Like, we had something specifically designed to kill us, and we murdered them all. We killed every single one of them. They're gone. Don't mess with humans, turns out. We took over everything. But we're sort of benevolent apex predators. We care about whether species go extinct or not. And you can live your life like that. You could be sort of a benevolent apex predator in a way. You can get everything you want to have without hurting people. You can get everything that you need in your life without destroying everything. And that will lead to self-respect, and that will lead to a good life for you and a good life for others. And you can have these cute little cats like I have walking around my house. They're like little mini apex predators, but I take care of them, and they're very sweet, and they're very loving, and they're very cute. You can do whatever you want. If you want a cat, you can go get a cat. If you want a dog, you can go get a dog. Take care of a little animal. The world is your oyster. And I encourage you to go find that adventure. Stop thinking about your life in terms of like economic accomplishments and timelines and dates and all this crap that doesn't really matter. And think about it more in terms of an epic adventure, a journey, a story to some extent. I don't want you to focus too much on the narrative structure of it. I want you to focus more on the just having the adventure. And then you can think back on the points of the adventure as you're doing them. Because what I don't want you to do is try to control the outcome too much. I want you to try to be in a good place. And really, as long as you're alive, you're in a pretty good place, historically speaking. Um, a lot of the heavy lifting of protecting humanity was done by people who are already gone. We pretty much built societies and structures which make people pretty safe. And the big variable is whether or not people can find meaning in their own lives. Because if they can't, then we do really weird stuff like go to war with each other. And um, that's also part of the reason why I think it's important to contribute to a culture of people who know what the point of life is and aren't feeling too vengeful and too bitter, which will reduce the likelihood of horrible catastrophe, self-induced by man horrible catastrophe. So, um, I hope that the idea of the video was pretty coherent. I went through a lot of content, but in summary, go live your life and go take the adventure and trust yourself and have faith that you will be able to make it right no matter what happens. Um, it's all going to come from that blend of faith and freedom of will. Once you get that blend right, things are really going to start happening for you, and they don't need to be justifiable. They need to be ethical, and that's going to be a process of trial and error that you're going to have to go through for yourself. So, with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you found value in this, please like, subscribe, and share it to your friends. Start the conversation with them. Head down to the comment section, drop a comment if you feel so compelled or inclined. And thank you for watching. And I'm going to be trying my best to upload once or twice a week. So thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Bye bye. And all of you bakery and coffee companies, please endorse me. Please sponsor me. Thank you. Bye.